What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the shop. Today I'm going to be doing a quick overview of the Chef Kit's sphere cutting jig. Now, this is in no way intended to be a tutorial or instructional video. It's not even really a review. It's just me sharing my experiences thus far. I've used it about 3 times. I think this is maybe the second or third sphere that I've made on this tool, and there's lots of good videos out there, instructional and review and otherwise, and this one's just my initial experience, share my initial experience with it. So that being said, let's get into it. So the wood I'm using today is a piece of magnolia branch. It's a branch off of a magnolia tree. It's very green, which is probably not an ideal material to make a sphere out of, as you know, it's going to warp and carry on and do that kind of stuff, but that's okay. So what I'm doing here now is I've trued up the cylinder and I've cleaned up the ends, and now I'm cutting a tenon on the bottom, which I'll be putting a dovetail on so that I can mount it in the chuck, so that I can get rid of eventually get rid of the live center at the end on the tailstock. So this is my 3/8 inch beating and parting tool, and I use this to size and shape my dovetail tenons. So now that it has a proper tenon on it and a corresponding dovetail, I can go ahead and mount the blank into the chuck. Now, just good advice, whenever you're using a chuck, it's always a good idea to tighten it from both sides, because there is a little bit of mechanical slop in most chucks. So that's always a good practice to get into. So now I need to determine the diameter of my cylinder, so that I can make a couple of marks on the side of the cylinder. And what I'm going to do is mark that out. And basically a cylinder is a square because it's the same dimension in all directions, so that's why we take this measurement. And I use a pencil with the hand wheel and extend those marks all the way around. Then I'm going to make a mark for the halfway mark, and also I'm going to make a mark at this cylinder is about 3 inches, so I'm going to end up with a mark about every 3/4 of an inch. And these are just guidelines to help me roughly turn this thing into something reminiscent of a cylinder. Now that I have my layout marks, I'm going to bring up the tailstock for support for these early shaping. Why not have it? It's not in the way at this point, so it's always good to use it if you can. So the first thing I'm going to do is define the end of the sphere, which is also going to make a little bit of room. Clearing this material out is going to make a little bit of room for the cutter as well when we start using the jig. So I'm going to use my parting tool to take out most of it, and I'm going to switch to I'm not sure if that's my bowl gouge or my spindle gouge, it's one or the other, and just clear a little bit of room and make some room so we can work. And once I do that, then I'm going to start making this roughly into a cylinder. So I've sped this footage up a little bit so that it's not so tedious, but you might be wondering why I bought a jig for spheres when I have a couple of videos on this channel showing how I turn a sphere without a jig. Well, this way is a lot faster. So instead of having to do all the detail work with getting it exactly cylindrical, I can do the rough work and let the jig do the rest for me. And I have a couple of projects, a couple of artsy projects that I have on the to-do list that involve spheres, and having this jig is going to allow me to make those spheres faster, and I can focus on the art side and less on the sphere turning side. So that's the reason why I would have bought it. I think somebody asked that in my Instagram, one of my Instagram posts, but there you go. So now I'm making I'm just making a guideline that goes from, I guess, end to end of the sphere. And basically what I'm going to do is use that to help line up the tool and make sure, as a visual reference, to make sure that the tool is traveling in a straight line across the top of the sphere. So now it's time to switch out the tool rest for the sphere cutting jig, which also fits in the banjo. And it comes with that handy stop collar so that I can set the height one time for the center and not have to worry about setting that again, as long as I don't change the machines, change lathes. And here you can see me using that guideline to check and make sure that the cutter is traveling in a straight line from end to end on my sphere. So basically the way this works is there's a big knob on the top, and you turn that knob and it lowers the cutter. And what you want to do is you want to take the lightest cut you can initially, and then just take light passes, continue to take light passes until you have your cylinder shape. So you just loosen the locking knob, tighten, lower the cutter a little bit, make another pass, and just make successive passes until you get through it. And I've truncated this part a little bit too. There was quite a few more passes than what's shown here, but it also gets a little tedious watching. I mean, it's pretty cool to do it, but it's a little tedious watching it. So, and then I just opened up the view a little bit so you can see me operating the levers and things between passes. So you go ahead and watch me finish off doing the rough part of the turning here. It is pretty cool watching those shavings fly all over the place. It's pretty neat. So once you get it into the basic spherical shape, you're going to have to part it off so that you can get rid of the little nub at the end. So I'm going to use a parting tool and part that off. So I have this little homemade sphere holding jig. I've shown these in the other videos that I've made. It's basically just a piece of scrap that has a hemispherical shape carved into the front of it. And whenever I mount this up, I always touch up that hemispherical shape, because the jaws crush the wood a little bit every time you put it in, and it changes the position just a little bit. So I just clean it up to make sure it's as accurate as I can get it. For the tailstock side, I use these I use a homemade holder, basically very similar to what I put in the headstock, except I just thread it onto the end of my live center. Now, to be honest, these are very rudimentary, and I really need to design something that holds the spheres a little better, but you're going to see a little wobble, and it's coming from, not so much from the sphere, but from the holders. But that's a project for another day. And for my purposes, this is going to work just fine. So you basically mount it between centers, and then I have a light on the back, which kind of shows a ghost image on the opposite side from where I'm cutting, and you can kind of see the material that needs to be removed. And I'm also watching that same area and making very light cuts to remove that extra material, and that extra material is the nub from when we parted off the sphere. You just take your time here, make light cuts, and you'll be done with that in no time at all. Now, I've also truncated this section. I've cut out a lot of the fidgeting and the excessive cutting that I probably did. That was also not likely necessary, but I cut that out because it's a little tedious. It's all the same thing. So once you have it shaped pretty much the way you want, you can switch to a sander, and you can go ahead and finesse your final shape. You can go ahead and remove any tool marks or anything like that you have at this point, and really make it very smooth. I use these twist lock connectors, these twist lock sanding pads, and they really only sand in one direction. However, sanding in both directions can also help you tame wild grain or tear out, some of those issues. So the fact that these cup centers are hemispherical in nature, and the way they hold, you can reposition your sphere across several different axes and sand it to really make sure that it has a spherical shape and feel to it. And that's pretty much it. It's all done. Pretty nice result. Achieved fairly quickly. So that's going to really allow me to focus more on the artsy side of these projects. So thanks for joining me in the shop. If you enjoyed what you see here, be sure to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Dreadnought make something. Peace.